time. Thank you so much for joining us today for a webinar entitled Does It Really Matter Where You Work? I'm Mélanie Drouin. I'm a senior consultant at Great Place to Work. A lot of you will have heard me speak before in these webinars. Today, we'll be discussing whether it matters where employees work from. And it's going to be a bit of a departure from our regular webinars in that I don't have a guest. It's going to be just me. And we'll be a little bit heavier on data than our normal sessions because there's this really great piece of research that came out of the US earlier this year that I really wanted to share with this group. We still get a lot of questions around everything having to do with hybrid work, in the office mandate, and things like that. And so I really wanted to share this piece of research, which was conducted in the US, but we know that the data applies in Canada. We're seeing the same trends here. But first, as always, a little bit about Great Place to Work. Great Place to Work is the global authority on workplace culture. We conduct the largest annual standardized workplace survey. And for more than 30 years, we've worked with companies all around the world to help them gather feedback from their employees. We recognize organizations that create those great work cultures. And we do a lot of research with all of the data that we collect to understand what works, what doesn't, and to help organizations continuously improve the workplace experience. Because our mission is to help every place become a great place to work for all. And so remote work continues to be debated in many organizations as many businesses want to bring workers back to a centralized environment. And I often get questions from executive teams, what's the best thing to do? What's working well for other organizations? So today we're going to look at what the research says. And as I mentioned, the research was conducted in the US, but we know these motivational drivers are also true in Canada. That's a super interesting thing about the work that we do. Even if there's differences per region, what creates a great experience and what allows us to trust in the workplace is the same for everyone. And a lot of employees love working remotely. And remote work options have benefits for both employees and employers, right? Remote work has the potential to facilitate recruitment, to increase diversity and inclusion by adding new candidates to our talent pool, and it removes barriers to workforce participation for certain individuals. Now, at the typical US workplace, employees who work remotely are reporting a more positive experience. Fully remote employees are more likely to say they look forward to their work each day compared to on-site employees. Remote employees are also more likely to report that people give extra effort, are more willing to cooperate and to collaborate, and have an overall healthy workplace environment. And unsurprisingly, remote workers were also 19% more likely to report a healthy work-life balance. However, remote work is not a magic bullet. And I'm going to stop this for a moment. I realized that I forgot to give my little bit of an introduction to let you know that the chat is open. So please go in there. Please, you can chat with each other. You can share LinkedIn contacts if you will, all of that good stuff. And if you have any questions for me, I will answer them at the end of the session, but please type those in the Q&A so that we can see those questions. We don't always see everything in the chat. Sorry about that little pause. Now back to what we were talking about. So remote work is not a magic bullet for building a workplace culture. With remote, hybrid, on-site work, all carrying different risks and different benefits for employees and employers, the very best workplaces are ignoring trends and instead of focusing on the unique needs of their people and their operating environment. They're finding ways to meet the needs of employees and create a great experience for all workers, regardless of where they work. And I want to answer a major question right now. The Great Place to Work research shows that there is no magic number of days that employees should work from home or from the office to achieve the highest level of workplace satisfaction and engagement. Sorry about that. I know a lot of people ask that question and are hoping that we're going to able to tell them, here's exactly what you need to do, and it's going to make all of this a lot easier for you. But unfortunately, as with everything that we do, it's a little bit more complex than that. So, what our research shows is that it's not where you work that's that important, but it is who you work for that matters. Now, due to the realities of the post-pandemic environment, our research found that in typical workplaces, typical employees paid much more attention to work-life balance, to employee well-being, and even to pay and benefits. But these gains fall short of the experience offered by the great workplaces. Companies whose focus is on building and maintaining high trust cultures on every aspects of the business. And so for remote and on-site workers and hybrid workers as well, everyone reports a worse experience working in the typical workplace than working in companies who have built high trust cultures. So again, these results that we're seeing on the screen here is a mix of hybrid, remote, and on-site workers. But when we look at all of those, that separately or together, the trends remain the same. Employees have a better work experience in what the organizations that we call great workplaces, so those who have the high trust work cultures. Companies that build that trust across the organizations have higher level of psychological health and better retention. And employees are actually 22% less likely to look for another job when they report having psychological and emotionally healthy workplaces. And that's true in every type of organization. And again, what our research shows is that trust is the key ingredient to creating high performance and resilience workplace cultures, no matter where people are working from. And so, before I share a little bit more around the research and what you can do and what you can be thinking of to really address this um, hybrid versus in the office versus, you know, all of the different ways we can handle that in the organization, I'd like to hear what your organization is like. So, which of these best represents your organization? You are fully remote, you're on site every workday, you have to be on site on specific days, on a specific number of days, but specific days as well. Or there are guidelines around remote versus in office days, and teams make their own choices on when they're going to be in the office. Or there are guidelines and individuals make their own choices of when they're going to be in the office, or everyone decides what works best for them. What does that look like in your organization? Give you just a few more seconds to respond. Wonderful. Ethan, do you want to show us the results of the poll? Thank you so much, Ethan. And so when we look at these results, we do see that for the vast majority of people on the line, there are guidelines around remote and in office days where either teams make their own decisions, their own choices. That's 38% of you who answered that. Guidelines and individual make their own choices is 35%. And then we're on site every workday, or everyone decides what works best for them, and only 3% answered that we are fully remote. On 14% we have to be on site on specific days. So we do have quite a mix here of different realities in your organization, and that bodes very well for some of the information I am going to share next. Now, the data isn't overwhelmingly in favor of either remote or in-person work, but it does paint a very clear picture of the risks and opportunities for both approaches. So companies can either mandate where employees work, or they can offer latitude within a framework that sets clear protocol and expectations. And it sounds like that's what the majority of you are experiencing right now, is we do have that framework, we do have those guidelines, and then people can make decisions within that framework. Now, where employees work isn't as predictive of performance as whether or not an employer seeks employee input on its remote or hybrid work policies. So I'm going to repeat that. Where people work, whether they are in the office, whether they or in your workplace. It doesn't need to be an office. Of course, we don't all work in offices. So whether they are on site, whether they are remote, or whether we have a hybrid model, that doesn't matter as much as whether or not employees have input on those policies, whether or not they are able to make some of the decisions and what affect them. Mandating specific days, mandating how and when people are going to work does pose a risk to the employee experience for on-site, hybrid, and remote workers, pretty much to the same degree. Having a voice, either on the individual or on the team level, is connected to key business outcomes for all employees, regardless of where they work. When employees have a say in where they work, retention improves. Employees who report being able to decide where they work are more likely to stay with their company long term. When employees have a say in where they work, they're less likely to quit and stay. So that I'm disengaged, but I don't feel like I can leave my job. So I'm just going to continue working, but we all know with low engagement, we also get low outputs, right? But with improved engagement, when people do have a say, employers are more likely to go the extra mile to serve the customers and improve internal workflows as well. And employees who have a say in where they work have better relationship with their managers. Mandates on where an employee work threatens to undermine the employee trust in their direct leaders, even if their direct leaders aren't the ones that made the decision. The having to reinforce those decisions and a lot of the conversations that have had to happen in certain organizations when people have had to go back to work and it was mandated and there wasn't any flexibility has caused a diminished trust between employees and leaders. So now I want to take a quick look at some of the data behind what I just shared. So what we see on this slide is the percentage of employees who want to stay at their current employer versus those who do not want to stay at their current company. So this was, yeah, two choices. I want to stay or I don't want to stay. And in the first two columns, we have the overall average for the US. Then we have the results for those where employers mandate work location without any employer input. So we see that I don't want to stay in my organization is the highest when employers mandate work location without any employer input. And again, these employees can be hybrid, they can be remote, they can be in person, but they didn't have a say. Next, we see the results where teams or work group decides where they work within a framework put forth by the organization. So we have those guidelines and then the teams decide. And finally, on the right completely, we have those where each individual employees can decide for themselves. And clearly, the risk of turnover is lower when employees can choose where they work when they have a say, and employees whose teams or work groups choose their remote work policies are almost two times more likely to want to stay than those where there's a mandate. Employees who choose between remote, hybrid, or on-site work are almost three times more likely to stay in their current organizations than those where it is mandated. So these numbers speak pretty loudly in terms of the impact of having a say in decisions that affect us. That's certainly something we talk a lot about at Great Place to Work. Now, does this mean that the best approach when we look at this data is to let the individual decide where they want to work, right? Because looking at this chart, this is where we have the lower turnover. This is where people want to stay in their organization. Well, in some cases, yes, it can be best to let individual decides, but not always. It does depend on what you're trying to achieve. So let's look at our next metrics that I wanted to look at. And here we're looking at employees stating that they're willing to give extra effort at work. And we see the results here separated by our remote employees, our on-site employees, and our hybrid employees, which is really interesting to look at it in this way. And so at the top, we see the stated discretionary effort for those whose the employers mandates the work location. So when the employers decide this is where you're going to work from, and these are the days or whatever it is, we see the discretionary effort. People willing to give extra to get the job done are some of the lowest numbers that we see across the board. Now, At the bottom, we see those where the team decided what we can do, right? And so I forgot to mention, sorry, I forgot to mention our hybrid workers. And so in the gray at the top, we have employees mandate. In the black, we have individuals, and in the red, we have teams can decide. I got a little bit confused with my chart there. But what we can see is that the gray, the mandated work days, is always a little bit lower than the rest. And then when we look at people who had an opportunity to decide as individuals, those are a little bit higher. And team or work group decides, I'm having issues with this slide deck. When the team or work group decides, that red line is where we actually have the most benefits in terms of people are willing to give extra to get the job done. And so in the previous slide, the best results in terms of retention were when individuals made their decision. Here, when we're talking about discretionary effort, people being willing to go above and beyond, we actually get the best results when the team can decide when we are in the office within some guidelines, when we are in the office, or if we are in the office. I'm going to use when we are in the office to talk about all of these things. But certainly, we do see the impact when there's a group decision. And I want to look at one final data set here. And this is the relationship with the managers. So here we have our gray line at the bottom, which is the employer mandated where people work and when. We have our black line, which is the team decision, and we had the red line, which is our personal decision. And we can see the scores on the statements. My manager understands what's important to me. Managers encourage a healthy work-life balance. Management cares about me as a person, not just an employee. And managers foster psychologically and emotionally healthy workplace. And what we can clearly see is that on all of those ratings about how managers care about employees, the ratings are lower when there was a mandate on specific days into the office. Now, it's understandable why people might want to mandate specific days in the office, because when I talk to people in organizations where everyone can make their own decisions, one of the things I often hear is, well, there's not much point in my going into the office because when I'm there, I'm sort of working remotely the same way I would at home because other people are working from home. And so, certainly from that perspective, having the team or the work groups decide when are we going to work remotely and when are we all going to be in the office so that we can collaborate in person does seem to be a really good hybrid, if you will, of mandating or of giving total liberty, right? That does seem to create a pretty good organizational blend where people find value in being in the office because they are together when they're in the office, but they still have something, a voice in terms of what that looks like. And so the key to figuring out the right blend of on-site, remote, and hybrid organizations, it is about committing to listening to the needs of employees at every step of the decision-making process, right? And if you're already pretty far down the path, if you've already mandated that people need to be in the office on specific days of specific weeks, and you made that decision without a lot of employee input, it's not too late to listen to people and make modifications to best meet your organizational needs, which is not to say that you're going to change the mandated days in the office and things like that, but this is about thinking about how can we involve people at this point in making it better for everyone, making the best use of our time together, making the best use of our time being remote. And so, some things that you can consider doing around those lines is surveying employees around what appeals to them about remote work and what appeals to them about on-site work. And then by understanding what people like about both types of work, that can help you create a better or a more conducive environment for people who have to work remotely or for people who have to be on site or for those hybrid workers so that they have the best experience possible when they are in those different types of situations. Now, the next thing you might want to talk about is offering flexibility. Often the remote work policies that people really, really like, that flexibility, that work-life balance that we get from working remotely, oftentimes that flexibility doesn't have a lot to do with the actual location where work is done. It is just that it's not at all as obvious when we're working from home and we leave for a couple hours in the middle of the day because we have a dentist appointment, right? And so allowing for that flexibility in the workplace and making it show that people feel like they can take advantage of it can certainly bring some of the advantages of working from home into the workplace for those workers who are on site or on days where some of those workers are on site, right? And so just understanding what people like about both. In the same ways, when you ask people, what do you like about on-site work? We can try to do more of these great things on-site that the people really like to do when they are together. So it's really is about that flexibility and understanding what drives people, what makes people happy when they're working remotely, what makes people happy when they're working on site, and then adapting our politics to meet that. And then it's also about leading with our value, right? Um, it's about making sure that we are in line with what we say that we're going to do, right? And so we want to think about our commitments to our customers, our commitments to our employees. We want to think about those in-person activities that we're doing when we do ask people to come into the office or when people because of their jobs don't have any other choice than to be in the office. We want to make sure that whatever activities we have value both for the organization and for the employees, right? And so this is again, leading with your values is all about how we make our decisions, but it's also about checking in with our workers. Are we walking the talk? Are we meeting our promises? When we asked you to come back in the office, we said we wanted to come back in the office so that we could all collaborate more closely together and have some of those informal conversations. Is that actually happening? Are we actually living that in the office? And that can go a really, really long way into driving employee engagement no matter where they work, right? And so I think we've done a pretty good job so far in highlighting that the remote and hybrid work puzzle is full of nuances. It's not a super easy thing to do because we're dealing with human beings and human beings are complex. And so one way of working hybrid in the office 5 days a week, on site because that's what our job requires, remote all the time because we're far away or because that's what the organization decided to do. They all have benefits, they all have risk, and they vary depending on the workforce composition. So we do need to think about the specific needs of our workforce, which is why we want to involve them certainly in everything that we do. But they also vary by industry. And so in the following slides, I do want to share some industry level data for four key sectors of industries when we did this research project. And so looking first of all at technology. When we look at the technology industry, remote employees scored their experience higher. This is on the left here, when it comes to being able to take time off when needed. And on-site employees, so people who were in the office or who were hybrid, so were spending some time in the office, gave higher scores to we have special and unique benefits. Management has a clear view of the organization and how to get there, where the organization is going and how to get there. And management keeps their promises. And so we see that there are pros and cons. We see that the work-life balance is a little bit higher with people working remote, but there are some real advantages to employees being on site in terms of that connection with the leadership team, right? And so it is up to you or your organization to determine what's most important to you and your workforce to create your great environment. If you're in an environment where work-life balance is a key driver for your workforce and you've made promises regarding work-life balance, you might want to think more about that flexibility and adding a little bit more remote. If you're in an organization where, trust is a little bit lower, people don't completely understand the vision of the organization, people, the relationship with management and visiting them, keeping their promises isn't as high. Maybe you want to spend more time in person so that you can create some of those bonds, right? And so some of the things that leaders in the tech industries might be thinking about: create a unique experience for remote employees as well as those who are on site. If you have remote employees that you can't bring into the office, a lot of tech companies that I work with have started hiring remotely because you get more access to talent that way. How can we make sure that the folks who are working remotely have as great of an experience of our special and unique benefits? Are there things that we're doing in the office that we could replicate for them at home, or are there different things that we want to do? For remote employees, increase communication and listening to ensure they stay connected to that top management, that they understand where we're going, that they trust us to keep our promise. Ensure job performance is assessed based on outcomes, not inputs as well, right? We know one thing that we do when we look at inputs versus outcome is we do tend to prioritize visibility. So I can see that you're working over the person's impact. So it's a different way to measure productivity, which can be hard to do when we're working in a tech environment where we can't count the number of widgets that the person made. So really being focused on those outputs will be really, really important in terms of the technology sector. When we look at healthcare, healthcare obviously is very interesting because most of healthcare employees do have to be on site in person. But when we look at the remote employees in healthcare, they're the ones who give higher ratings to special and unique benefits. In the tech industries, it was people who were on site who appreciated the special and unique benefits more. In healthcare, it is those who can work from home who appreciate that a little bit more. They also feel that their leaders understand them and that they're valued regardless of their roles. So, a very different environment when we're talking about those remote workers in healthcare compared to those on-site workers. So, healthcare leaders can be thinking about finding ways to communicate respect and appreciation for the service of the on-site employees, right? Every employee is valued regardless of role, making sure that we're really doing more of that for our on-site employees to bring those numbers up to so they're at the same level as our remote employees. Investigate the unique needs of workers in on-site roles and create benefits that are specifically catered to them, right? That special and unique benefits again. Understanding what would drive those results for on-site employees. And recommitting to employee listening to ensure every employee feels seen as and heard and take meaningful action on feedback raised by employees, especially those who are on site in healthcare who report a slightly less great experience than those who are remote. In terms of the finance industries, uh, which is also a big industry, of course, in Canada, on-site employees feel more informed, more cared for, and they feel better connected to their impact. I feel and make a difference than those who are remote. And so again, very different outcomes here for people who are on-site versus remote. So in finance, it's about increasing the efforts to communicate with remote employees, being really, really mindful about how we're going to do that and the frequency at which we do it, helping managers connect with their direct reports and learn about their lives outside of work. So it's not all business. We do have some of those water cooler conversations online, and remote workers need to be tied to their sense of purpose and impact in their role. I find that very interesting. I feel I make a difference here in finance, which is different. Now, it could be that our on-site workers have more direct contact with the public, so they are feeling that impact a little bit more. But again, how can we make those remote workers feel the impact that they have? Because, of course, if they are working with us, it is that they are important to our organization. And finally, the last one I wanted to talk about, the last industry, which again, a very different one, is manufacturing and production. And so in manufacturing and production, of course, we have a lot more on-site employees in most organizations that we have hybrid or remote. But here, when we look at those hybrid employees in the manufacturing and production environment, they say they have more fun at work, that they have more opportunities for special recognition, and that they're involved in decisions that affect them. So leaders in the manufacturing environment really need to focus on those on-site workers, those who don't have the ability to do hybrid, to help on-site employees have a little bit more fun, to ensure that they're recognized for their contributions, and to focus on listening and communicating how leaders are responding to employees' concerns, right? That I feel that I have a voice in decisions that affect me. So depending on the industry, I mean, I could talk to about this all afternoon. The piece of research is really, really interesting. And it is available on our website. So if you want to see all of the data here, or if you want to share that with some of your leaders, if you already are having some of these discussions, or if whatever decisions were made in your organization, some people are still struggling with. We see that in a lot of organizations where there's still a portion of the population who don't want to come back to the office, even if it's just a few days a week. And so, taking these tips and tricks that we share today and thinking about your industry and your specific workforce, really to make those small adjustments to really try to create the right environment for your organization and for your workforce can go a really, really long way. And of course, I've already said this a few times, remote, hybrid, or on-site works aren't magic bullets for a better workplace culture. The only magic that is to be had here is the one leaders will create when they build and maintain high trust workplaces where people have a say in the decisions that impact them. It's not easy. We wish we did have that magic bullet for you, but we need to create our own magic, and we need everyone to participate in that as well, not just leaders, but employees as well, in terms of communicating with us in a way that helps us better support them. And so, in terms of those key takeaways, when there's just me talking, it goes a lot faster. Uh, what we want to remember is that there's no one size fits all or magic formula that works for everyone. There's no easy answer. The culture of the organization is a better indicator of engagement that whether their employees are working on-site, remote, or hybrid work model. And that is the key to me in all of this data is that we need to be doing everything right for people to be highly engaged no matter where they're working physically in terms of our organizations. Listening to employees and involving them in decisions that impact them drives engagement, retention, and trusting relationships. And every industry and every workforce has its particularities. And so that is it for me for this introduction to this great piece of research. It's called Back to Work Mandate, if any of you are looking for it on our website. And here I have a question. Thank you so much. If you do have questions, please type them. I have one in the Q&A right now, but we do have time to answer more if anyone have any other questions. And so someone who wishes to remain anonymous said, how do you convince the management team to incorporate a hybrid workplace? And so that can be a tough one in terms of convincing management to make some of these changes if they're not already convinced. And so my first tip for you would be to share some of this research, share the impact that it has on workforce engagement, that it has on turnover, that it has on discretionary effort when the employer mandates how we're going to do. So I'm going to assume that this person asking the question has a everyone on-site work policy. And so if we want to introduce some hybrid, if we want to start introducing a little bit of opportunities to work from home, it's about making the case for the return on investment, like with anything on business, right? And we know that what's better for people is better for business. And with this piece of research, you do have the data to back it up. And so certainly that could be a really, really good way to open up the conversation and perhaps to, suggest that maybe there could be a trial period where, maybe for a quarter or for half a year, which very clearly stated up front, so there's no broken promises to try and see the impact on the business if we do start introducing either a hybrid model in terms of this person who asked a question or any other changes that you want to bring up possibly with your leadership team regarding where people work from. I don't see any other questions here. I do see just a tiny little bit in the chat. Seems that Great Place to Work has been very active in the chat. But thank you everyone for your hellos, for your good mornings. It's great to see you here today. As always, we do invite. Sorry, we do invite you to visit our website for so much more information in our resources section and connect with us on the Red Cube community and on LinkedIn so that you can learn about all the new research we have available for you on a regular basis. Thank you everyone for your time. Oh, I can see we have another question coming in. Hold on, I need to go back to my Q&A. Oh, it's the same one, and I didn't mark it as answered. All right. Well, thank you everyone for your time. It was great to see you once again. This is our last webinar for the year, and we'll be back in January. See you all next year.